Brothers and sisters, grace to you and peace from God our Father and from our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. Amen. On its surface, we kind of gloss over the question that Jesus asked the man today, and yet when you really stop to think about it, it is a most ludicrous kind of question. Do you want to be healed? What kind of question is that? The guy's been laying there for 38 years. And Jesus comes up to him one day and says, do you want to be healed? Yeah. I would love it. What kind of question is this? And so this is what we run into right away. Jesus asked the guy a question that, as we kind of tend to gloss over this passage, we just do so. But when you really stop to think about it, it's just kind of an insane question. The guy's been there for 38 years. Think about this, guys. For 38 years, he has been unable to work. The guy has been unable to move. And all he can do to eke out any kind of a living is beg. And therefore, as he lays there in the lesson today, this is about as good as it's going to get for this guy. 38 years. This guy has been doing this. And it's not that he hasn't tried to make his life better. As we're told, he goes down to the pool of Bethesda every single day. Pool of Bethesda, actually two pools just outside of Jerusalem. And what people would do is, archaeologists believe that it was spring water. It was a spring-fed pool. And what people would do is they would go down there every day. And over the years, they had built these structures around the two pools, the upper and the lower pool. And as we are told by John, they had these covered areas that were supported by colonnades. And what people would do is every day they would go in there and they would gather underneath the colonnades. And the belief was that as soon as the water began to roil, as soon as it began to bubble, which would happen maybe once or twice a day, and completely at unpredictable intervals, what would happen is everybody would rush for the water to be stirred and get into the pool. And they had to get into the pool first. Why? Because what everybody would do is as soon as they saw the water start to roil, they would make a mad dash to jump into the pool, because the belief was that only the first person who entered the pool, once the water began to roil, they were the only ones who would derive the healing benefit that the waters promised. And so what this guy does is he goes down to the Bethesda pool every single day, waiting for that moment, once, maybe twice a day, when those waters start to move. And as soon as that happens, everybody who's been staring at the water for hours on end, mad dash to get into the water, because one of them, maybe two every day, are going to receive the blessing of being healed of what ails them. And so here's the man's problem as he tells Jesus, do you want to be healed? Well, here's the problem. Every time I try to get into the pool, I don't have anyone to help me. I'm blind. I can't move. And so while I'm trying to get in, someone else goes down ahead of me. There it is. Every time this poor guy tries to move, he can't move fast enough. He can't get off the dime. He literally can't. And there's no one who's willing to help him out on one of those days to go, hey, Phil, let me give you a hand here. Let's get right up to the edge. And as soon as I see that water start to roil, boom, I'll pull you into the water. Not one single person over that entire time has offered that. And so when Jesus says, do you want to be healed? I don't have anybody to give me a hand. And so I always miss my chance. And so time after time, and here's the thing, my friends, 14,000 times. 38 years, day after day, 14,000 times. This guy had gone to the pool of Bethesda, sat patiently, waited for the water to roil, and had tried to be the first one in. And 14,000 times he had failed to get himself healed. I just want to put that into some kind of perspective. 38 years, my friends. 1981. Remember what you were doing in 1981? Some of you don't, because you weren't even born yet. 1981, what was going on? Early January, after 444 days in captivity, American hostages from the consulate in Tehran, Iran, were released from captivity and they came home. That was the end of January. Also, at the end of January, A guy named DeLorean released a car that became iconic for the 1980s. If you were cool and you could afford a stainless steel car in the 1980s, a gull-wing DeLorean was the car to have. In fact, they even made it famous in a movie back then. The first space shuttle flight, not the last, the first, the Columbia, blasted off in April. First time that the shuttle had ever gone into orbit, and the first time that a man-made shuttle had come back safely to be reused. There's a little thing called MTV, which debuted on August 1st at 12:01 a.m. Anybody remember what the first video ever broadcast was? Video Killed the Radio Star by the Buggles. First video ever shown, and MTV changed the way we consume music. And for those of you who enjoy video games, Pac-Man had become so popular that they started to produce other games, and a very famous one closely on the heels of Pac-Man, Donkey Kong, was released that year. That's 1981. And if you remember any of that stuff from 1981, consider this. From that day all the way to where we stand today, that's how long this poor guy had gone day after day to that pool, waiting for the chance to be healed. Guys, 38 years. More than 14,000 times he had tried to do this, and he couldn't fix himself. And so all of a sudden, along comes a guy on the 14,001st day and says to him, "Do you want to get well?" And this is where we come across and go, you know what? What kind of question is that? It seems no duh. Of course I want to get healed. Of course I want help. And at the same time, 38 years is a long time. And the question fundamentally becomes, Jesus is promising to heal this guy, and here's the thing. Will the healing that Jesus brings this guy automatically make his life better? Seems like a slam dunk. Yep, you're healed, and this guy's life is a bowl of cherries. Stop real quick, though. When Jesus says, "Do you want to be healed?" If this guy says yes, everything he has known for almost 4 decades is going to change forever. And here is something about our human nature that we have to be aware of and honest about. Sometimes the problems that we have are problems, and yet at least they're things that we know. There's an old proverb that says, "A broken clock is still right twice per day." A broken clock is doing no good to anybody, except for the fact that at least twice a day, when you look at that broken clock, it tells you the correct time. Bottom line is, Jesus is saying to him, are you ready to be healed? That is, are you ready to have your life changed? Is that what you want? And Jesus' healing of this man is going to permanently change everything he has known for almost 40 years. And so if this guy says yes, the life as he has known it for 4 decades will never be the same. And it's not that crazy of a question. Do you want to be healed? Well, of course I do. But wait, before you answer, consider this. Because this is effectively what Jesus says to the rich young man in the story that we hear in Matthew 19. The rich young man comes to him, right? And he's like, listen, I am righteous. I've done everything the right way. What must I do to follow you? And Jesus says to him, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and then you'll have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. And if this guy truly wants to do what Jesus requires, it is going to change his life. He's already laid it out there. He's already made sure that there's a big crowd that can hear what a righteous guy he is. Lord, what do I got to do to follow you? Look at all this good stuff that I'm doing. And Jesus tells him what it's going to require. And now the question is, do you want to be healed? Because if you say yes, it will change your life. And what do we know about that young man? He goes away sad. Why? Because when he finally considers the cost, when he finally realizes what it is going to cost him to change his life, he doesn't want it. And so as Matthew tells us, he goes away sad, because the bottom line is he wasn't ready to be healed by Jesus. Same thing is true with the adulterous woman in John's Gospel. Of course, she is within a breath of having her earthly life taken from her, and by rights, according to law, she should have. And Jesus comes along, and he says, "Neither do I condemn you." And by the way, those of you guys who are holding rocks, any of you who has not sinned, take a throw. And all of a sudden you hear rocks fall into the ground as these guys realize they can't throw the first one, let alone the subsequent. But now what does Jesus do? Jesus doesn't just say to the woman, "Neither do I condemn you. Have a great day." To that, Jesus says, "Go now and leave your life of sin." Jesus heals the woman. He literally saves her life for her. But now he makes a command on her life, and he makes a demand on her to change the life that she has led to that point. This woman now lives for another day, and for days after that. But from this point forward, her life is nothing like it was before. Jesus has healed her. He's saved her life literally. But now, because of what he says, "Go now and leave your life of sin," she will not live in the same way she has. She can't. Was she ready for it? Don't know. Ready or not, your life is saved and you live to see tomorrow, and you are newly created to live for Jesus. Do you want to get well? That's a question that seems absurdly put to this poor man who's been suffering for 38 years. And yet, as we sit here today, this question of Jesus hangs in our sanctuary because it is also a question that the Lord is putting to us as well. Ask yourself, do you want to get healed? Do you want to get better? Because the bottom line is, just like this poor guy, we too, as a culture, are ailing in all kinds of ways. And we know what they are. We talk about the fact that poverty in the United States, we've gotten better with it. Since the 1960s with President Johnson, we have moved and gotten better at dealing with poverty, and yet we have never been able to get below 11% poverty in our country, and we've always bumped around 15%. As we sit here right now, our poverty rate in the United States sits at about 14%. We've never been able to get lower than 11%. 1971 is when we were at 11%. So there's always at least somewhere between 1 in 10 and 2 in 10 Americans who are living in poverty. Do we want to get better? Do we want to make it so that fewer and fewer people are living in poverty? And if we answer yes to that, what's it going to take? The obesity problem in America. This infographic right here shows you that in the 1950s, and we all know it, a cheeseburger, fries, and a pop at a fast food restaurant was markedly smaller than the cheeseburger, fries, and pop we get today. I mean, guys, come on. When you go to a fast food place and you go to the drive-thru window and you ask for whatever their regular size pop is, my gosh, you end up with a barrel, right? I'm not kidding. I mean, to ask for a small is like, are you kidding me? I just like your regular size pop. And it's like, I need 2 hands to wrap around the cup that I put into my car, right? What that's done, my friends, and not just fast food, but the way in which we do everything in our country, right now, 40% of Americans are defined as being obese. 40%. 40% of us have more weight on us than is healthy. And that number has statistically and consistently gone up over the years, has not gone down. Guys, these days, we were just talking with Nori and Nat. The way in which we talk to each other these days is pathetic. When you walk into a store and you refer to someone as ma'am or sir, and they're surprised by that, they actually thank you for the courtesy. What has happened to our society in the way we treat each other, in the way in which we overlook people who are there to help us in stores because we're so wrapped up in what's going on in our lives? When people stop and thank you for being polite, we in our country are sick. We've talked about this before too. A number of Americans now who claim any type of Christian faith, Lutheran, Baptist, evangelical, any. The number of people who claim that Christian faith has gone down precipitously, even in just the last 10 years. The most recent number from ABC News and the Washington Post is that of those people younger than 30 years old in the United States these days, 35% of them don't believe in any kind of faith whatsoever. The lion's share of the people living in our country, 35% of them, they will never be here. Why? They have no need for it. And guys, that has gone up at a scary rate of pace in the last 50 years, even in the last 38 years. Go back to 1981 and think about how much it was part of our DNA as a culture to just go to church on Sunday. Think about that. How many of us did that? And now, how many of us just go, it's what I do? A lot fewer. Folks, we're sick in our country. We're ailing just like this guy has, and we've been doing so for years. And in the face of all of this, Jesus asks us the same exact question that he asked that man. Do you want to get well? And here's the question we have to ask ourselves today. Do we? Do we really want to get well? Because what's going to end up happening is how we answer that question will affect our lives. And the fundamental question we have to ask ourselves is, do we really want to get well? Because in order for us to really deal with poverty, in order to deal with obesity, in order to deal with the way in which we treat each other on a day-to-day basis in our culture, it will result in a change through Jesus Christ in terms of how we live. You don't get to act the same way today as you will tomorrow if Jesus brings you healing. It doesn't work. And here's the other sobering thing to think too. Before you answer the question, do you want to be healed in terms of the epidemic of people in our country who do not believe and do not worship Jesus Christ, be careful how you answer that question. Do you want to be healed? Because answering yes to that question will require a change from Christ in terms of how we live. Think about this, my friend. Since I've been at Bethel in June of 2017, coming up almost to the week on 2 years of being here, how many baptisms have we had here? 5. 5 kids from the exact same family, one time. How many weddings have we done here? 0. How many funerals have we done here? About 14 of members of this church since I started. Guys, here's the deal. What are we being called by the Lord to do? We're called to reach out with His good news and be used by Him to help other people come to faith in Him. How are we doing that? The bottom line, my friends, is if we say we want to be healed as a congregation, there will be challenges for us in terms of how we function going forward. I don't mean for that to scare you. What I mean is that's the reality. The reality, my friends, is 35% of people in our country under the age of 30 could care less about what we're doing in here on a Sunday basis. And how is Jesus Christ calling us to do things in a way that will matter to them? How is Jesus Christ calling us as Bethel in a way that will result in God reaching through baptism to bring other people to Himself? Do you want to be healed? And before you say yes, Consider what that will be. There's an old joke in Lutheran circles. How many Lutherans does it take to change a light bulb? Change? What's wrong with the old light bulb? Well, the old light bulb's burned out, my friends. And you're not seeing too well by it. Yeah, but it's the light bulb that we know. True. And the challenge, my friends, becomes this. Jesus comes to us today through the story in John, and as he did to a guy who'd been suffering for 38 years, do you want to be healed? It seems on the surface to be an insane question. Of course I do. But as soon as the guy says yes, everything for that guy will change. And it will not be the same yesterday as it was for him going forward. And we as a society are ailing on all kinds of different levels, not least of which is how few people, and the numbers are only going up, in terms of how few people want anything to do with Jesus Christ in any kind of an organized, worshipful way. And so we as Bethel, as we've been talking about with B to L, and we're going to keep talking about it and keep putting our heads together, what do we got to do? Because again, my friends, we have a good church. You all are awesome people. I love being here. But we as a group are going to have to put our heads together for the sake of Jesus Christ in this neighborhood and figure out what we do to what? Reach out more with Jesus Christ, that they can be baptized by Him, that they can be affected by Him, that they can serve Him, all these things that we're talking about. On first glance, the question that Jesus asked the man seems like strange. And yet, like the man, how often, to use a phrase, do we go back to the mat? How often do we find ourselves, whether it's something in the world in terms of obesity, or whether it has to do with poverty, whether it has to do with church, you know what? I want to do something. But here's my challenge. The problem that I know is at least something I know. I've dealt with it for a long time, and it may be a problem, but at least it's something I'm familiar with. And so what we do is we go back to the mat. We go back to that which we're familiar with because at least it's something we know how to deal with. Here's the thing, though. It can be done. These trends in our society, particularly when it comes to this alarming trend of people who no longer claim any affiliation to worship in Jesus Christ, it can be reversed. Why? Because we're not alone. We're not the ones who have to try and fix it. It is precisely just as He did with that guy that God's will be done. And just as He did with that guy, Jesus breaks into our space right here today, and He says, you're not by yourself. You've been trying this for 14,000 days, and you've been trying to fix this on your own. And the bottom line is you can't. And on this 14,001st day, Christ breaks in and He says, let me help you. Let me be the one. You said nobody's there to help. Here I am. And He provides us with help. He's the one who seeks us out. Many of you remember back in the early 90s, mid-90s, Stephen Covey was a big name in business. Franklin Planners and so forth. Great line that he has. Accountability breeds responsibility. And by the way, that hyphenation of that word is his, not mine. Accountability breeds responsibility. And I think what Covey's saying is, as we are accountable to something bigger than ourselves, whether it's a corporation or for us, a Lord, that breeds what? Responses from other people. It breeds the ability to respond. And Christ is accountable to us because He has sought us out. We are accountable to Him because we worship Him. And in that accountability, what does Christ promise? It means that rather than going back to our mat, rather than going back to the problems that we know, and you know what? It's broken, it's not perfect, but you know, at least I know it. What Christ says to us, let me help you up. Let me put you into the water, not of a pool at Bethesda that really can't do anything, but through the water of baptism that has the power to wash away sin and join you to the life and death and resurrection of Jesus Christ. Now that water can actually do some healing. Rather than going back to your mat of things that you've known before, let him heal you and give you courage to go from your mat. To go out into the world creatively, resourcefully, and together to start tending to these ailments that we have in our society. Notably, those people who have fallen away from anything to do with Christ and the church. What does God say through Isaiah hundreds of years before Jesus ever came onto the scene? Fear not, for I have redeemed you. I've summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. There it is, my friend. Do you want to be healed? And our answer as people of faith, scary stuff. But what we say out of faith, because we are not in this alone, is we say yes by the help of God. The Lord be with you.